Welcome back to the Butterfly Season podcast. I am so excited to have someone I've been following on TikTok for a while now. Her name is Bianca Grace. She is a therapist and she's on TikTok viral with posts about codependency, narcissism, and she has over 100,000 followers, over 1 million likes, and I'm excited to share with her you guys. And so we're going to dive right into all of the things. We'll see where this goes, but I hope that you guys find this as valuable as I have found her TikTok and all of the things. So welcome to the show, Bianca. Bianca, welcome to the Butterfly Season podcast. I am so excited to have you on here. I'm a huge fan of your TikTok and you provide so much fun value for me. So thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you too for recognizing, I think this is one of the parts of this work that I just journeyed out there and started speaking from, my clinical experience, but also from a creative side and wanting to educate people in a way that helped really turn their minds on to what maybe they're experiencing and seeing that it's not about therapy. It's not about, I have this horrible problem all the time and this is sort of diagnosis and medication. It's actually about everyday life, communication, relationships, self-awareness. And one of the main problems in our relationships that I've found is this codependent issue. And a whole bunch comes from that place. I mean, so we can tie that into a lot of things that we might be suffering from.
I know. So a little bit about myself and my codependent journey. So on this podcast, there's been a theme of codependence, and unintentionally, you were a very intentional piece to helping unpack the puzzle of all that is codependency. But I didn't realize that I struggled with codependency until a random, who's now a great friend of mine, girl, just told me, "You're a codependent person." And I was like, "No, I'm not." I had no idea what it even was. I thought codependency was oh, please hang out with me. Don't leave. I literally had no idea. And then she kind of explained it, and it was something that I could not unhear in my marriage, in my business relationships. It was literally everywhere. But I still feel at least for me, there's so much that I don't know. I've learned so much on your TikTok, but I feel like there's a wall and there's a long laundry list of things that I don't know. So for the listeners, can you unpack for if you're talking to a third grader, what is codependency?
I think when I try to do that, I say, whatever it is that you've ever heard of it, whenever you're trying to understand something for the first time, go ahead and move that aside. Just unpack, a lot of times we have to deconstruct the way we've made sense of our some sort of stereotype of codependency, because it really has more of what I call, it's a meta schema. Sure. It's really a major way of thinking. I say major because it's about how I relate to the world and how I see the world relates to me. And if that from childhood is distorted, where I now have to constantly accommodate the other person, because of a parent's demands on me and their lack of maturity or their addiction or this chaos or that starts to now I'm being raised in an environment where I have to manage the feelings of other people. And I don't have anybody helping me to understand myself or helping to support me emotionally. So right away, I'm wired from the outside in.
Wow.
And that's really, because we must survive and stay attached, even if our parents are not capable of even emotionally being there for us, we're wired to survive. And so we're going to figure out the safest way to be with those individuals, with our parents. And a lot of times this is a win. This is a very adaptive scheme.
So what are the type of parenting behaviors that foster a child growing into being a codependent adult?
Well, behaviors where, the child feels that I mean, I'm going to just kind of speak in more of a free associative way. Like the first thing that comes to my mind is when a parent acts as though something's more important than not in general. I'm not saying that they can't, but something is more important than you. Like again, drinking, working constantly, arguing with mom. There seems to be something like always in the way of being able to be interested in coming down to your level, getting to know you. You feel very distant from a parent. And so you have to now, in order to be close to that parent, figure out a way like, oh, they like it. They like this. Or if I act this way, I'll get a pat on the back. So really not being seen, and not like a parent not really seeing their children, paying attention to their children, and being very demanding emotionally.
Yeah. So that resonates with me. So there was one TikTok that sparked my attention, but I think you were talking about codependent men. And I think it was like mothers who demand performance end up fostering like a codependent child and an adult. And initially when I was a little bit of backstory, and I will land this plane. Initially when I was like exposed to codependency, I started to read the book Codependent No More, and it was heavily on like addiction and all the things. And I'm like, I at least didn't have that in my upbringing. There was no addictive behaviors or tendencies. And so I was just like, I just don't understand like how did I become codependent? Like, what was it that became that? And when I saw that TikTok about performance, and so for me, growing up, my mom was a single mom, and like we grew up very poor, so work was a high priority for her. The time that we would spend together was really in the car, like going to and from either daycare or school, while she like went to work in the day, then went to school at night. But she would tell me too, she would say, you have to teach me how to love because my mom never loved me. Like, I don't know. You have to teach me. She would say that. And I would also get so much praise for great grades. Like if I had good grades, even if I was like behaviorally bad, if my grades were good, nothing mattered. Like her whole thing was we need to get out of this lower income city. You need to go to college and you need to make something of yourself. And so grades were high priority. Even like before we would leave, she would even start the car to take me anywhere, I would have to say 5 times that I would go to college. Like I was doing this from kindergarten.
Wow.
Yeah. Like, let's unpack that.
And I think, it's on my podcast, Emotional Warrior Podcast, just to say to anybody who's listening, the first guest I had, I do I believe a 4-session sequence with her and her relationship with her mother. And it actually, this reminds me a little bit of that, where there is a lot of influence early on when she's very vulnerable to the influence of mom and wanting to obviously see mom, struggling and working hard and wanting to appeal to that side of her and make her proud. And, so there is when we're doing this as children, a lot of times there is a reward and a gain from going ahead and going along with this. But then all of a sudden, what's happening to you, though, is developmentally, you're not getting the full picture. Like, really, you also want, and you'll need to be loved for who you are, college or no college, behavior, your interest. And that part of you is not getting sunshine, I call it. Is not getting that. And she's telling you pretty clearly, and maybe again, as a young girl, you're not going to be able to recognize, but there is something about, I don't know how to love because I didn't get it. So this is going to be our love exchange.
Yeah.
So this is kind of, then again, when we talk about attachment style, I think this is an important look at that too, is that she attached a lot of significance to this and your worth in her eyes. So therefore, what you considered your self-worth actually had to grow in this garden. Yeah. It wasn't your garden. This was hers. And though it has its benefits, it does leave a person when it comes to relationships. Now, maybe you're a major performer now.
Like 100%. Are you kidding? Right. I am a performer through and through, and I'm with attachment styles and Enneagram and human design. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with human design or Enneagram at all. Are you?
Enneagram, yes. Human design, maybe not.
So my Enneagram, and I'm sure if you're familiar with all of the numbers, like I'm a 3, which is performance-based, accolade-driven, like all of the things. And so I'm at a time in my life right now where I'm kind of reevaluating, like, is this personality type learned behavior? Is that who I actually am?
Right. Okay. That's what, now with considering what I said, I think that these moments where we reach enough maturity and we've accomplished enough within an area that other part of us says, see me. And I think it's an important time to say, okay, instead of clinging to the performance and scared of venturing into this place or even doubting. I think sometimes we can become, even once we start to really want to start diving into ourselves at a deeper level and growing these parts, we sometimes, again, resent how much time we've spent in this other area. So being mindful and compassionate towards the side of you that has been predominant, but definitely I think it's an indication that it's not all of you. And that you do have, that's the thing, is that we do have this calling to really become whole. I think that's something that I've noticed, especially anyone who has dealt with having to really invest in a part of themselves too much for love of self. And then again, this codependent matrix is like, and I call it that, is because we get stuck not knowing how to really like, okay, how do I leave this? This self-gratifying, it's because even though it's sacrificing, then even though it's exhausting, even though you're not getting a lot of emotional needs met, it's still what you've known. So anyway, it's tough to transition to a different mode.
So what are some tools or steps or things that you would encourage someone to do as they transition out of codependency? Like, let's just say someone who's listening to this podcast today is like, oh shit, I'm codependent. Where do you start after that?
I think that this is, first, it's a process of discovery, of self-awareness of all the aspects of you, which are, and why. And why, meaning it can tie back in, and this is kind of the hardest part of the work, because a lot of times when we die, it's not about always, blaming the parent and all this kind of stuff. It's really about tying it back to the kinds of things that your parents said and how you made sense of them, in order to start to deconstruct that, going, oh, that part of me was really, is strong, but that's way too much. That's mostly her still driving that, like in my head. So I'm going to deconstruct that voice so I don't have that inner critic. And I'm going to have my performance. I'm going to go the distance I want to go. Not be a perfectionist. So I think that's kind of a little bit of an intro into how you would start to rebalance these qualities in yourself. But I also think that, might as well go ahead and stay again. Like, don't run away from the problem. Like, how do I fix it? What's the problem? You need to stay in the problem long enough to understand it really thoroughly, because it's really a lot of places. So, meaning like, what's the problem with being this way? What why? What
can
I
answer that? We can unpack. So I would say the problem of being this way for me is that there's no self-worth, which initially I was like, well, I'm a very confident person. You would imagine a performer is probably very confident because you know how to perform, you know how to like get the A, you know how to stand out, you know all of the things to do, which helps with confidence, but that's so much different than self-worth. And so the problem would be my worth is not intrinsically in myself. My worth would be in an accolade, an award, whatever it is that's like front facing and on the surface.
So that's left you like because of that. So in some ways, I'm just going to point out the obvious. Your self-worth is now invested in something you can't control. It's outside of you. It's
what other people think of the thing.
Right. Their approval, their accolades, them giving you this, them giving you that, them seeing this about you. So it makes you incredibly dependent on continuing the cycle to gain worth. And that's where we get into. So that's the maladaptive part, because how does that not work? I mean, that's the, I think, not listing, but talking openly about the struggle with what happens when they're not there, when you're on your own, when you don't have self-worth, when it's not derived inward, when it's still on this outside-in network 100% of the time, not 20 or 30, which is, whatever percentage, this much less is would be normal. That leaves you in a place it's scary.
Mm-hmm.
It can be like a void. It can be isolating. Again, it can then start other behaviors too. So,
like what other behaviors birth out of codependency?
Well, what kind of behaviors birth out of the self-worth being, again, sourced from outside is that we could talk about either self-medicating.
Sure.
You can also start self-defaming, like as far as really treating yourself badly, very critical, harsh towards yourself in order to keep that part of you that has an emotional need to be loved by yourself, to be cared for by who you are, that people don't recognize how much they need themselves for themselves to feel safe in the world.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting because I feel like some of these behaviors, especially performance and even negative self-talk, it can get people far, but then it stops. You hit a ceiling, perceivably far, in terms of the outside validation, right? You can negative self-talk your way into being the number one X, Y, and Z. Help me unpack that.
Yeah, I mean, those are defense mechanisms or coping skills to keep in the, what we're trying to do is wall off, and especially in codependency. And I think in Pia Melody might be a good, person to go to as well if you're not in the addictions world. But, it's really, how do I not face the feelings? Because one of the things that codependency is about is taking care of everyone else's feelings. Yeah. Making sure you feel good, that you're approved, that you approve, that did I do this right? You're always looking to take care of somebody's feelings and you're not taking any action inward. So they're what I call like defenses against seeing your needs. Now, if you have a concept of yourself as worthless, as unless somebody approves of you, or as bad, or as lazy, or some part of you is able to continue to be like a really harsh inner critic, then all you're blocking yourself from seeing, again, a part of you that hasn't been nurtured and is really suffering. That's what I say is the wall, because at some point you're just crushing yourself.
Yeah. So help me unpack codependent relationships, like in couples or even business relationships or friendships. Is it typical for two codependent people to attach to one another, or do codependent people attach to different types of personalities? Like what have you found maybe is most common?
Well, I would say this is where, if we're kind of talking about narcissism and codependency, it's a good time to bring that word into the discussion, because this is one of these things, again, that have to do with the attachment and the development of codependency in the child's mind and how they go into the world and who they are attracted to. And there's a lot of people in the world with narcissistic tendencies and codependent tendencies all in the same person. Very much so. And but some people are predominantly codependent and some people are predominantly narcissistic. And I know that there's a smaller percentage of people with narcissistic pathology at that higher level than there are codependencies. That this is a very common issue, but at the same time, it's very important because it's so impactful on your relationships.
Okay.
So that being said, I want to just go like in a little bit in the gray area with the narcissistic thing, is like who you're attracted to is going to be somebody that idealizes you in the beginning, and that you as well idealize as fitting some inner template, inner wish, inner fantasy, inner idea of what you've always wanted. And a lot of this has to do with how what you didn't get as a child,
Mm.
and what it is you think you have to do in order to get self-worth and validation.
So could you give me a practical example of what that looks like? Like what would, like, a pretend people, what does that look like?
Well, in pretend people, if there was a couple, I would say, if a man and a woman, came from narcissistic mothers or tendencies, and that they were and again, I say that word and I hope that everybody goes and watched my narcissism stuff, because it is a spectrum. It is a arrested development in certain aspects of emotion. And your mother, we would say that wasn't developed, she has some issues in that area, that she really put upon you, as far as my mother didn't teach me to love, so I don't have the responsibility of learning. Wait a second. I'm going to put it on my daughter. So when somebody offloads and says, you're going to be my channel to figuring out love, and I'm not taking responsibility for my own growth, we know that's very self-serving.
Yeah.
And you're not having empathy for the person that's having to now take responsibility for your feeling.
Right. So are you saying, and I know, and I want to tap into the narcissism and narcissist aspect of it all too, because I feel like it's such a buzzword and it might just turn people off automatically the moment you hear it. But before that, am I understanding you correctly to say that codependent people often have narcissistic behavior, and or narcissistic parents create codependent people?
Both.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's why it's hard to say like who you attract. It's more, or the type of person that you attract. It's more that when that person walks up to you, are they fitting the fantasy in your head that you might not even know is there, could be completely unconscious, of wishes to be seen, to be special, to be the center of another, of a love objects world that you never got. And that's who codependent people are attracted to every time now. Even if you go to an interview and the boss is like, wow, you're amazing. This is going to be great. I've got all these opportunities for you and we're going to go there and I can see your potential. And then the next day is like, I really need you to go and pick up this and that, or she, or whatever. And it's like, and you just start to, now you're just task oriented and, you didn't do this right. That initial expansion of like, oh my gosh, maybe they're seeing me. Maybe I have this potential. Maybe I'm going to receive the love or heal. That's our hook. And then after that, man, it's so hard to get off the hook. Now it's just like, you can deal with so much pain. Your pain threshold, your ability to sacrifice, your ability to take it, just maybe because that's coming.
Yeah.
You believe in your wish more than you believe in, you're integrating reality.
Wow. That is so sad to think about. And so how do you recognize what your thing is? Like, what's the thing that sparked that codependency in you? Because for me, it's performatism, but there's another aspect of it that's could be around addiction. Help me reconcile how those two different types of familial households could breed that same thing.
Well, the thing is that you can have a lot of tendencies that some people, that's why it's so important to do more of like stay in the problem for a while, not spiral, but stay in reflecting, because there are so many things that could actually be connected to it. You could come from a household of alcoholism where you had to play the role of mother very early. So even a positive thing like being very mothering is something that if it's brought on too early because mom wasn't there, might become a trait, again, that's very burdensome when you get older, because now that was something very important to your family and that you had to do, but it was painful because you never were mothered. So it becomes burdensome emotionally to always be providing something you never get. So I say, what is it that you're doing that's causing you a burden? Anything, whether that's, it could be a behavior or it can be more of an addiction, But I really like to move people a little bit more away from that, because I think that could also be modeling and stress management or modeling a behavior, or, genetic, and of course, societal. But I also feel like, is there something more in your personality and your character that seems rigidly placed and causing you burden, causing you burnout? That you're this way, and it seems to be a way to go. It seems to be right, but there's something about it that's really causing you grief. And those are generally the places where you're stuck in a loop.
Like a loop. Yeah. I mean, I can definitely see that, even with respect to like having a higher pain tolerance or putting up with more in different situations or dynamics that hey, this is probably lasting longer than it should. And I guess it really is like with the hopes that there to be some sort of change.
Yes. And I love that. And this is something that's actually come up several times this week. So that word hope, and I really want to do more of an extensive dive into it, but just on the surface, we are taught hope in a very belief system oriented way. And hope, when we're like, again, I hope one day I hope one day this works, I hope one day, we have to level up our understanding of hope into a more mature way when it comes to our adulthood, because we can really get deceived by putting the hope glasses on. A codependency, I say, puts a fantasy cloud over your head, and you cannot see past it, or it's a fog, and you're hoping for the relationship to work out. Based on what? Based on what reality that you're coming to me with? And over time, I've gone and said, it's not, I don't have anything against hope, because I think it's a powerful emotion. But I do think it needs to be used in a way that doesn't put our blinders on, or this fog and whatever metaphor. I think we really need to think about, I can have hope if I have boots on the ground and I'm doing something that shows I'm taking steps forward towards my emotional health and understanding myself, and or professionally developing myself. I'm doing something. So I hope I get that job, or I hope that they come to understand this because I'm working on communicating. There's something like, you can have hope for things that you're putting your effort into, but when you have hope in one day, next time it'll be, that's where it's like the snake eating its tail. And I find that to be so deceiving. And the more people do that, the more often they fall into depression, to be honest, because now it's like magical thinking. And when they're just constantly depressed and not seeing that they have any power other than hope, then they become helpless and hopeless. Then it's the backside of hopelessness is hopelessness. And that's a very self-destructive place to be. So
yeah, wow. Which makes so much sense. I mean, I never thought about hope in that way, but I can see now the split between like the hope that is like faith, right? The hope for things unseen, or like the reality hope, or 3D hope, right? Like, what are the facts, actual concrete facts that are pointing to either to or away from the thing that you're hoping for? I love that. I want to circle back to narcissism for a little bit and help unpack what that means. We hear it all of the time. And I don't even know that I know fully.
Well, so I would say that there are a lot of resources online, and I'm not an expert in narcissism, but Dr. Ramani is, and she's written a lot of books. She has a lot of info out there. However, I come from a psychoanalytic background, and how we understand it is that narcissism is healthy in the beginning. We have a primary state. We're born into the world not knowing the difference between self and other. Having the experience only of our bodies and people touching and washing and taking care and nurturing. And as we slowly start to like emerge and, obviously our brain starts to be able to have more complicated thoughts, we are able to see. This is the thing. We are able to see an other and feel how we feel around them, but we're still not yet in control. So we're still like very emotionally, we'll cry when we want to cry, we'll say what we want to, we'll grab, we'll bite, we're emotionally, we're very raw. And so we stay in this state until someone says no, or let's not do that, or ouch, and then we start to see that we are having an effect, or somebody else is having a strong effect on us, and that there's two people. Now, this primary narcissism, again, in taking that time in the beginning, even when you're a toddler, to feel like everything is amazing. I'm walking and everyone's cheering. I'm going to the bathroom, they're cheering. I'm eating, they're cheering. This, like the universe is literally surrounding you. They're taking pictures of me in the bathtub. These are all ways that this is healthy. I mean, to the extended states in childhood or in toddlerhood. But that's that state. Everything's around you. But then things should start to kind of equalize and split off, and you see that you're part of the world. Well, some people don't, because the parent, they stay the center, because the parent doesn't have within them the tolerance or the knowledge or understanding to tolerate the feelings they have to tolerate in order to create a frame for the child, discipline the child, be a container for the child. So as soon as that happens, right, this is why this is kind of complicated, is that as soon as the child is like, I don't want to clean up for dinner or what, I mean, that's this is earlier, but they can shame them, they can do all sorts of things. As soon as the parent does something that basically causes the feeling that the child has to just pull right back into them, or the parent doesn't stand up to it and really able to modulate it properly or teach them through it, that part of them becomes arrested. There's not really anyone else. It seems like, and I find this kind of a profound, like the parent is really the only one in charge of this. I mean, there are places in the world like friends, grandparents, other situations where you can emotionally grow. But really these very initial states of emotional development, if they're not nurtured and they are either massively condemned or completely like letting the child roll all over you, that becomes, again, this self-centered state never transforms. And let me just say one other thing, and this is why codependency and narcissism tend to be self-absorbed states. One part was really, again, had to hide and build a wall, and that's, I think that's the similarity that we face. Is like, I don't want to face that I have a part inside of me that I feel is very flawed, or that I feel is maybe this part of you that has, I mean, me, you, whatever. It's like maybe this part that hasn't ever gotten what it needed, and so we have made sense of it or have condemned it. Now, with narcissism, I noticed that what happens is usually there's either maybe with borderline personality disorder, there's a real struggle with this part of themselves. They want out, they want help, but maybe they don't. And it's just like, it's a huge struggle. But narcissism in general, if they were able to get away with all this behavior the whole time, and it was empowered somehow because the parent thought that was cool, or said that, you're going to be that extension of me, then we've got the antisocial, the sociopath, we've got a very extreme, the narcissistic personality disorder. And I don't know if I really want to go here necessarily, but sometimes when I'm talking about this, it's like with women and emotion, girls and feelings, and the parents like, oh, I don't know how to deal with it, so therefore I'm not going to, leaves young women and teenagers and just so vulnerable to making sense of themselves and the world from a very emotionally unhealthy place, and expecting, other people just to take it, other people just to, figure it out, and then they feel hurt. Nobody ever took the time to do that. And then they enter the world with a chip on their shoulder, and here comes the wrath.
Yeah.
So
let's bring this back to, I think this would be considered codependency, but you talked about trauma dumping. Can you tell me what trauma dumping is?
That to me is that's actually that's a great association to what I was just talking about with these certain, probably generation or two of females that I see. It's this, that maybe it's like the reality show phenomenon. Let's get it all out there. Let's wear all of our stuff on our sleeve. We can just talk about it all, not recognizing, having any amount of self-awareness around what kind of emotional state that puts anyone else in, or, that everybody just has to be able to share it and take it and do it. And, it's all a big, big show. And
so let's unpack that with a real world, or we could do fake people again, but a real world example. What do you mean? Where I'm asking this because I don't know that I recognize it.
Right. Well, in some ways, let's say this. Say you had, in this case, trauma dumping, and if I had all of these issues as a kid, and I had my friends around, or other, even I was part of the yoga world for 12 years while self-help came into the scene. All this yoga guru, they were gonna all get around a circle and get it all out and talk about it. And even then, I wasn't a psychologist, but that's whoa, this is not a healthy place to. So I'm going to say that's one way. That's not a healthy place to dump or to put all your trauma into a circle and see what happens. There's no benefit. As a therapist, there's no benefit in doing that, other than if you were in maybe a group therapy type of setting. That's totally different, and you can share stories. Dumping is this kind of thing that we've been allowed to do, and in some ways are been empowered to do, that I just find that is challenging. The other part is it within a relationship. Both men and women do this. So if they've been in relationships, maybe with a parent, maybe with a previous person, and they all of a sudden come into another relationship, and they say, you remind me of my mother. You remind me of my father. And you know what I did with my mother? You know what I did with my father? I was mad. I did all of this. I have this problem, and this is how I'm going to deal with it. And you're going to have to deal with it this way. Oh, okay. And so maybe the first time you're like, wow, that's scary. Am I like them? Of course, the porous empath is trying to figure out if they can they basically coordinate themselves and do the chameleon thing and not ever have to enter into that situation again, or be careful of that person. Never works. They've basically dumped on you the responsibility they have to work through their trauma.
So would okay, I think I'm understanding now. So would the example that I gave you of my mom saying, I don't know how to love, you have to teach me how to love because my mom didn't love, that's trauma dumping?
That would be, yes. I mean, you can tell right by now, I'm really not huge on the words, the buzzwords, but yes, she was at that moment handing off that, and that was a huge dump.
Yeah.
Because what is a little girl supposed to do with that?
Yeah. And what's so crazy is not even up until probably recently did I having these conversations about codependency and really understanding it, that I thought that was a problem. I was just like, oh, okay. I guess we'll figure it out.
That's right. I guess we will figure it out. And when you just said we, you just locked yourself in with your mother's issue and said, well, and now I guess it's ours because you've just given me that job. Nope, that's a boundary. And actually, Mom, I feel love. So that's you're unpacking to do. That's something for you.
Yeah.
And I'll be here to support you. But it's just to your point. absolutely so many times there are people that come into working with me that end up in that place. That's this, of course you don't know. It's like, it's your mom.
Yeah.
Until you become really aware, you don't recognize how much of an issue that might have caused you.
Right. And when you said the we thing, and you said, of course you did we, right? And you just locked yourself in to that. I've noticed that throughout life in relationships, friends, in business relationships, in employee relationships, I've always had a hard time, and we can unpack this. I've always had a hard time saying, this is something you need to fix. I would always say, we can fix this. We need to do better. We, even though in those moments I felt like I fixed all the things that I needed to fix. But I cannot say, because I'm worried how that might make you feel. So maybe you feel less bad about yourself. So if I say we instead of you.
That's good. That's great insight. So already you're starting off with a good association to why you do that. You're more concerned about the way that I feel than you feel. You know that your feelings are that you've done the work, and that now I need to do more work. But that in and of itself, you're going to deny that reality. You're going to go ahead and just, now all I do, this is a great example of how persistent the MO for people, this outside in dynamic, is take care of the other person's feelings. And if you can pause on that, because it's going to be a habitual thought, like this is kind of hardwired. If you can pause on that and say, wait a second, am I taking care of somebody's feelings, or am I actually communicating with them and helping them as much as I possibly can? This is another thing, is like the we world ends up not ever frustrating anybody to grow, because we're too scared of letting them feel something.
Yeah. And I've noticed that I've allowed, in those circumstances, I've allowed the behavior of whatever issue it is to last longer. When I'm saying we, but really I'm not emboldening you to figure it out for yourself, or to change, because I'm taking on, I guess, energetically, or just however, these responsibilities. And then does that mean that that person would feel that there's a shared responsibility there? Am I communicating that?
Yeah, no, that's good. No, I wonder, what do you think? Do you think in doing that they've ever shown that they understand that there's a shared responsibility? What has been usually the outcome of doing that?
No. I almost feel like, at least in my circumstances, it's always been like I feel like I have all of the responsibility.
And they got a pass.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people that will milk this about you, well, if I could just get you to that state where you say, well, we can work on it, then I got the pass. Whew. Big in relationships. I got the pass. And so I'm just going to be me until it happens again.
Yeah. And so that was part of the thing. So one of the things early on that I understood in codependency, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're doing it, at least now in adulthood and in different circumstances. I know that it's hardwired for like to feel love and to be seen and all of the things. Like that's something that's hardwired. But as it shows up in other relationships, whether that be marriage or otherwise, we'll use me as an example. I'm trying to control the situation. But then I end up, somehow the other person is either aware or not aware, but then they end up controlling me. Help me understand that better.
Well, you're only trying to control a certain level. You know, there's like control is in your world, this is the most important level to control because it's very dear to you. So, I mean, or that there's something very frightening about not being able to control this level. Have you thought about what it is that you would be scared of if you were to go ahead and say, you know, I've done this work and I see that, you know, I feel that you would benefit from doing more work in this area and then we can meet in the middle, meaning that you can validate your feelings, but just saying, these things to somebody arouses most likely a fear for you. And can you perceive what that would be? If
like me using the word we instead of I?
You using the word, it's you do some work.
Or you. Me using the word we instead of you. I don't know. I feel like, at least right now, it would be like, I don't want to hurt their feelings.
Go one step deeper. We got that one. That's right. What if you hurt their feelings? So yeah, what if you hurt your feelings? What if you hurt their feelings? What's going to happen? Maybe. Hypothesize it. Totally imagine.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe that would sour the relationship.
Go on. And if it's soured, it would lead to what?
No relationship?
For sure. Ultimately, and you just took the nice jumps. You know, you're doing a good job. Like,
I'm really searching here. I feel like it sounds really obvious, but I'm like, I'm not sure.
I know. You did it. No, meaning that you got there and actually you took it. But it's not meaning like, sometimes it's like, well, I fear that they're going to yell at me. Well, okay. Well, what if they yell? Well, then I fear that they're not going to like me and they're going to make my life a living hell. Oh, okay. Well, what happens if they make your life a living hell? Well, basically, number one, I don't have the emotional strength to get out of this. And then the second one is I actually feel like they won't tolerate me anymore. I'll be too much for them. They'll abandon me. They'll see me as all the things that maybe you were told as a child too that were very threatening about either you earn your keep or you have to, whatever derogatory thing, or that, you can leave, or if you've been threatened with abandonment or neglect as a child, sometimes too, standing up and saying you is like an unconscious, like there's a wall there. Like, no, don't you do that, because the wrath is coming and you could be abandoned.
Yeah. Another part of me just realized too, I think in saying we, I felt like maybe if I can meet them at an empathetic level, that they will change.
Yes. Now, as a therapeutic tool, right, and getting to know, and like that's a kind of an interesting thing here too, is that I don't want, and I did it even while we were talking, is that I can say you, but I don't want to necessarily imply you, because there's a lot of assumption there. I certainly know it's me, so I say we because we seem to be sharing an experience. And so I do think that we can be used in a way that shows I'm here and supporting you. We can work through this. And that's why I say it's so important to kind of be so self-aware, because this is a very tricky one. But we as a defense is when it's chronically used. And this is where I say, hey, everyone needs to develop like this understanding that's really more expanded. Now we understand we in 3 different ways or 4 different ways.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to be flexible in my use of this and recognize when I'm using it symbolically as a crutch.
Yeah.
Instead of growing and challenging myself to face my fears, do the work, say the thing. And if somebody reacts badly, well, thank goodness I know that. I know I have to work on my fortitude to make a decision to end up in a healthier place. Because that inner weakness, again, people that with codependent issues will definitely feel very emotionally adept, but incredibly weak emotionally. So there's this, I'm really strong and I'm super understand everybody, but I don't have it for me.
Yeah. So do you think, because I feel like even in social situations, I feel like it's kind of uncomfortable if I feel like someone's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. In what way? Maybe you can give me an example.
Like if there's one situation where I was with a group of friends and we were all there, and I felt like one person didn't want to be there. And so another friend didn't feel like they didn't want to be there, but I'm like, I could just feel like and it makes me want to relate to them on any level to get their like, I don't know, energy up or should feel a certain way, which feels like a level of control because I can't just sit with being fine that maybe 4 out of 5 people are having a great time.
Well, that person might be reminding you of something. Maybe that's another pull. One person, in these kinds of situations, it is important to sit with, the idea of maybe I'm trying to control them. Maybe there's something, by the way, that maybe there's something that they're exhibiting that you don't allow yourself to see within yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And not saying that this is it, but I would say, they're acting like they don't want to be here. I always repress that, and actually I don't. I'm uncomfortable with them, being something that I don't allow myself to be.
Yeah. Some of those questions, like, we hear them in different avenues, right? But I always struggle with, like, how could you figure out, maybe it's a feeling, if, like, whether or not that actually resonates with you. Like, how do you, it's like projection, right? Like, I feel like that's probably one of the hardest things to issue spot within yourself.
Yeah. I think is, again, it's not about necessarily getting it right. It's about being open to what comes to mind and going beyond the first thing, right? Usually I say thinking takes at least 3 steps. There's what, is going on. There's maybe the emotional reaction, and then what's happening. So maybe I'm uncomfortable with something, and then giving yourself some space to reflect. I'm not going to do anything. What comes to mind? And maybe 1 or 2 or 3 things come to mind. All of them could be equally valid. We are so obsessed with getting it right, and that's the one, and here's my point, and I figured it out, because then maybe I can fix it. And this is where people become exhausted. Like, especially for, my work, it's like I would be exhausted if I was trying to every little thing get right and fix that one and fix that one. So I think the same thing is kind of like self-inquiry in this situation is the reason why you're having that reaction is absolutely multiple. It's multifaceted. There's multiplicity in all your reactions. There could be something from childhood and there could be a way that you want to be seen, as the one that can lift the person's spirits and see that they're not feeling well. Maybe that gives you gratification. So, yeah, I think that's where we really start to go, especially in our adult life. We can hold space for all of these thoughts.
Right.
That's self-awareness.
Yeah, that's kind of mind-blowing to think about. I mean, it makes so much sense, but I feel like we're very absolute driven, yes or no, black or white, but society, 100%. Never gray, never, a lot of things can exist at the one time. Both can be true. Like those aren't common.
Yeah. And it actually cuts us off from, and I know people, I make this point is that thinking is like a more than a 2-step process. So, get into it. It's kind of interesting. It's cool that we can do these things, and people generally feel very empowered when they're starting to build, mind, thought, capacity.
Yeah. So is there like a method to what you would say the 3-step process is? Like, how can are there questions that someone can ask themselves to provoke deeper thought?
Yes, I think so. And the way I've talked about it or written it out is that, we need to be instinctual. We have judgment in a point of a second. I mean, there's things that are just hardwired. Trauma is also hardwired into that system as well. We can't really catch it. So I like to think of, the brain as a receiver. Sometimes too, this is meaning like a thought comes in and I'm not just going to grab onto it and go, yeah, that's exactly me. That's exactly what it is. No, you know what? A thought comes in and I can consider it. And I think meditation is really helpful for this, is to allow for the brain to continue to be like a receiver, like a radio. A lot of things are coming in. You're having a lot of different reactions and we're so overstimulated. It's so important. So, but even within our relationships, we can get very lost in a dynamic and a dance, and it's such an automatic space. And I really try to get people, even though they come to me pretty late, but back out into their corners and trying to go through a process of, situation happens. That's the one. It's happening. Emotions are aroused. Those are the first things. Even if you are only perceiving maybe the thought or a somatic experience like fight or flight, but something's being aroused. And so you need to pause. If you start from that point and go, you just attacked, you just said something that felt attacking and here I come. This is where I'm saying there's no thought anymore. And if we only come from a place of feeling to saying or feeling to expression, we're in the polarized thinking. We're in the all or nothing.
Yeah.
That's emotional reasoning is what I call it. It sounds reasonable. You attacked me. I'm attacking you. This is why I think so. But all of that is just all these words are being generated from an emotional space, not from a thoughtful one. So I say, pause and you can ask yourself. Sometimes I like to have people learn about themselves enough to be able to say something to themselves like, ooh, that's my inner mom, or ooh, that's my, past, or this is my trauma, or my X, Y, and Z, or I do this when that happens. If they can kind of pin it down for a second, move, what about this person right now is happening? Like, can I understand this from a different perspective? Can I put myself in their shoes? Isn't that not a good idea because really they are being cruel? And then you have to be able to play your cards. Like, that's the part about communication but as long as you're doing the inner work, a lot of times whatever is going to happen next is so much less destructive, so much less mess to clean up.
Right.
And that's where I think people really need so much more work is on communication strategies.
Yeah, I feel like communication can resolve so much, so much, especially over communication and all of the things. I want to close and thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely.
You have been so amazing and so helpful, and I know this will be so helpful for so many people with this complex topic that I feel like I haven't heard a lot of people talk about or break down. So I'm just so grateful that you were able to do that here with me today.
Totally my pleasure. And it has been so fun to talk to you. Anytime.
Likewise. And can you let the people know where they can find you online, on TikTok, your podcast, all of the things?
Right. So I think that the work that I'm talking about here, I have some amount of, we can go into depth on the Emotional Warrior podcast. So if people are really wanting to dive in, I would start from session 1 there, and even the interviews are great. And then also on TikTok, there's categories, and go in and really try to, start to use TikToks, I think, though, more as food for thought, motivation that kind of wakes you up. And I have book lists there too that I recommend. But diving into this work, I really think my key insight is this: you really have to apply. With codependency, we can think and we can contemplate and we can consider, but we have way too much bandwidth for patience and tolerance and all these things. We really need to apply these principles in order to break out of this mold and start to see something different than what we're seeing. So application, don't wait, communicate, and start building up that emotional fortitude and strengthening yourself. So
you heard it, guys. Application, application, application. Well, I appreciate you, Bianca. You've been so amazing. And I'm going to link all of that stuff in the show notes so that I can make it easy for people to find you. But thank you so much for being with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I will see you all again.